Blood dripped from Jamal Washington's split lip as security dragged him across the terminal. His $5,000 suit torn, his dignity shattered. Through swollen eyes, he glimpsed the flight attendant who'd denied his first-class seat, now pale with shock. Nobody knew he owned the airline's parent company. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories of justice served. Can you imagine being humiliated in public only to reveal you're actually the boss? Let's see how this powerful story of discrimination and accountability unfolds. Jamal Washington wasn't supposed to be successful. At least that's what society had conditioned him to believe. Born and raised in South Chicago's roughest neighborhood, he'd grown up watching his single mother work 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. The odds were stacked against him from day one, but Jamal wasn't interested in statistics or societal expectations. By age 16, he was working after school while maintaining a perfect GPA. His exceptional academic performance earned him a full scholarship to Harvard University, where he later continued to Harvard Business School. His classmates came from generational wealth and privilege, arriving in luxury cars while Jamal took the bus. But within those hallowed halls, intelligence and determination spoke louder than background, and Jamal graduated at the top of his class. Now at 42, Jamal had transformed from the scholarship kid to the CEO of Horizon Investments, one of the nation's leading investment firms managing over $30 billion in assets. His company had holdings in everything from tech startups to established industries. He'd built his reputation on seeing potential where others saw risk, on recognizing value where others saw liability. 3 months ago, Horizon Investments had quietly acquired a controlling interest in Mid-Air Airlines' parent company, Global Aviation Group. The acquisition hadn't made headlines. Jamal preferred to work behind the scenes, implementing changes before announcing new ownership. Only the board and top executives knew about the change in ownership, and they'd been sworn to secrecy until the transition plan was complete. Jamal's schedule was relentless. This week alone, he'd visited Horizon offices in 4 cities, conducting surprise inspections and employee evaluations. He believed in seeing operations firsthand, not just reading reports from behind a desk. Today's flight would take him to San Francisco for potentially the most important meeting of the quarter, a merger with West Coast Technologies that could result in a billion-dollar deal and thousands of new jobs. Unlike many executives who traveled with an entourage, Jamal often flew commercial, sometimes even in economy. You can't understand your investments if you don't experience them as a regular customer would, he often told his executive team. For today's flight, he'd booked a first-class ticket on Mid-Air Airlines, wanting to personally evaluate the premium service of his new acquisition. He'd chosen to dress casually for the flight. Designer jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and a leather jacket that cost more than some people's monthly rent. His Patek Philippe watch and custom Italian leather shoes were the only obvious indicators of his wealth, but most people wouldn't recognize these subtle markers of status. This wasn't the first time Jamal had experienced racial profiling while traveling. There was the hotel in Boston that had questioned his reservation for the presidential suite, the luxury car dealership where the salesperson had directed him to the economy models, the first-class lounge in Paris where staff had repeatedly asked to see his boarding pass. Each time he'd remained calm, using these experiences to fuel his determination to create change from positions of power. His executive assistant, Gabrielle Torres, had expressed concern about him traveling without security. "You know how people can be," she'd said while confirming his itinerary. "At least let me arrange for a car service at both ends. I need to experience things as they are, not as they'd be for someone with an entourage," Jamal had insisted. "Besides, I've been flying my whole life. I think I can handle checking a bag and finding my gate." What he hadn't told Gabrielle was that these unaccompanied trips served another purpose. Despite his success, despite his wealth and power, Jamal still felt the need to prove himself in every room he entered. He'd built his career knowing that as a black man, he would always face additional scrutiny, additional doubt. Rather than shy away from it, he faced it head-on, collecting these experiences as evidence of how much further society needed to go. "Remember the merger documents," Gabrielle had reminded him as he left the office. "And the board wants your decision on the new sustainability initiative by tomorrow morning." "It'll all get done," Jamal had assured her, with the confidence of someone who had never missed a deadline. "I'll call you when I land." As his town car approached the airport, Jamal reviewed his presentation for the San Francisco meeting one last time. The merger would not only be profitable for Horizon Investments, but would also create job opportunities in communities similar to the one where he'd grown up. This was the kind of deal that made all the long hours worthwhile, success with purpose. Little did he know that in less than an hour, his identity as a top executive would be irrelevant. In the eyes of some, he would be reduced to nothing more than the color of his skin, setting in motion a chain of events that would transform an entire industry. The airport terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of a Friday afternoon. Jamal navigated through the crowds with practiced ease, having spent countless hours in airports across the globe. He approached the automated check-in kiosk, scanning his ID and pulling up his reservation. The machine processed his information smoothly, printing his first-class boarding pass with no issues. A small but satisfying start to what should have been a routine journey. With his carry-on rolling behind him, Jamal headed toward security. The TSA pre-check line moved efficiently, and the agent checking IDs gave his license and boarding pass a cursory glance before waving him through. No additional scrutiny, no random selection for extra screening, a rarity in Jamal's travel, experience that he noted with mild surprise. After clearing security, Jamal made his way to the first-class lounge. He presented his boarding pass to the attendant, who smiled professionally and welcomed him inside. The quiet space was a welcome respite from the terminal's noise, offering comfortable seating, complimentary refreshments, and workspace. Jamal selected a leather armchair in the corner, setting up his laptop to review some final notes before boarding. He noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere as a middle-aged white couple entered and scanned the lounge. Their eyes passed over him, then returned with poorly disguised surprise when they realized he was sitting in the first-class section. The woman whispered something to her husband, who glanced back at Jamal before they selected seats on the opposite side of the lounge. It was a familiar reaction, brief but unmistakable, the momentary confusion when someone's expectations about who belongs in premium spaces are challenged. Jamal took a sip of his sparkling water and returned to his work, the interaction merely another data point in a lifetime collection of similar moments. Meanwhile, at Gate B23, flight attendant Rebecca Miller was having the worst day of her month. Her alarm had failed to go off, leading to a frantic rush to make her shift. During her drive, she'd received a call from her bank about a missed mortgage payment, the second in 3 months. Her husband's medical bills were piling up faster than their insurance could process them, and the financial stress was taking its toll. Now, 30 minutes before boarding, she stood at the gate with a pounding headache and frayed nerves. "You look like you could use this more than me," said her colleague, offering a cup of coffee. "Thanks, I'm running on fumes today," Rebecca admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. At 46, she'd been with Midair for over 20 years, watching as conditions for staff steadily declined while executive bonuses soared. The airline industry had changed, becoming more numbers-focused and less people-oriented. She'd considered leaving countless times but couldn't afford to lose her seniority and benefits, especially with her husband's condition. At the gate desk, Tyler Davidson was reviewing the passenger manifest with a scowl. At 34, Tyler had been with the airline for just under 5 years, but his personnel file already contained multiple passenger complaints about his rudeness and inflexibility. These complaints had been noted but never addressed. The airline was perpetually short-staffed, and management preferred to avoid confrontation when possible. "We're overbooked in economy again," Tyler muttered, "and they expect us to sort it out without compensation vouchers. Typical corporate nonsense. Just get through the day," Rebecca advised, knowing from experience that Tyler's mood could darken quickly. "We've got a full flight to San Francisco, but at least it's on time." As boarding time approached, passengers began gathering around the gate. The announcements began with pre-boarding for those needing assistance, followed by the call for first-class passengers. Jamal closed his laptop and made his way to the gate, boarding pass in hand. As he approached, Tyler Davidson's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Jamal stepped up to the desk, presenting his boarding pass with a polite nod. Tyler took the document, studying it with unusual intensity before running it through the scanner. The machine gave a confirmation beep, but Tyler continued frowning at the screen. "There seems to be a problem with your ticket, sir," Tyler said, his tone implying this was a regrettable but serious issue. "What kind of problem?" Jamal asked, keeping his voice level and professional. "The kiosk issued it without any errors." Tyler didn't meet his eyes, continuing to stare at the screen. "It's showing an invalid seat assignment. I'll need you to step aside while I sort this out. We're boarding first-class passengers right now." "I am a first-class passenger," Jamal stated calmly, pointing to the clearly marked first-class designation on his boarding pass. "Seat 2A." From her position near the jet bridge entrance, Rebecca watched the interaction with growing discomfort. She could see Jamal's boarding pass from where she stood. There was nothing wrong with it. She'd seen Tyler do this before with certain passengers, manufacturing delays or system issues that mysteriously only affected people of color or those with accents. She shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. Behind Jamal, other first-class passengers, all white, were being processed efficiently, Tyler's demeanor transforming into friendly professionalism as he scanned their boarding passes with barely a glance. "Sir, I believe you're in the wrong line," Tyler said, his voice louder now, designed to create embarrassment. "This is for first-class boarding only." Jamal remained composed, though a muscle in his jaw tightened. "I understand that. As I've shown you, I have a first-class ticket, seat 2A. He reached for his phone. "I can show you the confirmation email as well." Tyler's expression hardened. "Sir, please step aside. You're holding up the line." Several passengers were watching now. Jamal took a deep breath, weighing his options. He could create a scene, demand to speak to a supervisor, insist on his rights, but experience had taught him that black anger, no matter how justified, was often weaponized against him. Instead, he tried once more with deliberate calm. "There must be a misunderstanding. My ticket is for first class, as you can clearly see. I'd appreciate if you would double-check your system." Tyler's hand moved toward the phone at his station. "Sir, if you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to call security." The threat hung in the air between them. Passengers in line shifted, uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others watching with undisguised interest. Rebecca took a half-step forward, then stopped, conflict aversion winning out over her sense of justice. "I'm not being disruptive," Jamal replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through his system. "I'm simply trying to board my flight with a valid ticket." "That's for me to determine," Tyler shot back, already dialing security. Into the phone, he said, "Security to gate B23. We have an uncooperative passenger refusing to comply with boarding procedures." Jamal stood perfectly still, his expression carefully neutral even as anger and humiliation threatened to overwhelm him. This wasn't his first experience with discrimination, but the blatant nature of it, occurring in full view of dozens of witnesses, struck him with particular force. He was acutely aware of the eyes on him, the whispers, the assumptions being made. As he waited for security to arrive, he watched the remaining first-class passengers board without incident. Not one spoke up about the obvious discrepancy in treatment. Rebecca avoided eye contact as she welcomed them aboard, her silence making her complicit in what was unfolding. In those tense minutes, Jamal made a decision. This would be the last time he quietly accepted such treatment. Whatever happened next, there would be consequences, not just for Tyler Davidson, but for an entire system that enabled such behavior to continue unchecked. The security officers arrived at gate B23 with alarming speed, as if they'd been waiting nearby for exactly this type of call. Officer Frank Reynolds led the charge, a stocky man with 23 years of experience and 17 excessive force complaints buried in his file. Behind him followed Officer Dana Lopez, newer to the job and increasingly uncomfortable with her partner's aggressive approach to conflict resolution. "What's the situation here?" Frank demanded, addressing Tyler while pointedly ignoring Jamal. "This individual is refusing to comply with boarding procedures and becoming aggressive," Tyler explained, the lie flowing easily from his lips. He's insisting on boarding in first class without proper documentation. Jamal maintained his composure, though his heart raced. That's simply not true. I have a valid first-class ticket right here. He slowly reached toward his inside jacket pocket. I can also show you my ID and keep your hands where I can see them, Frank barked, his hand moving to his belt. The Yako terminal suddenly grew quieter, nearby passengers freezing at the escalation. I'm just reaching for my wallet, Jamal explained calmly, his movements deliberately slow and transparent. Frank stepped forward anyway, grabbing Jamal's arm with unnecessary force. I said, keep your hands where I can see them. The sudden contact caused Jamal to instinctively pull back, a human reflex to unexpected aggression. This slight movement was all the justification Frank needed. He's resisting, Frank announced, and in one fluid motion, he twisted Jamal's arm behind his back while forcing him forward against the counter. What are you doing? I'm not resisting anything. Jamal protested, shock replacing his previous calm. Dana Lopez hesitated before moving to assist her partner, her discomfort evident. Sir, please cooperate, she said, her voice lacking Frank's conviction. The situation deteriorated in seconds. Frank applied more pressure, forcing Jamal to the ground. The expensive leather of his jacket scraped against the dirty terminal floor. As Jamal's face pressed against the cold tile, he felt a sharp pain as his lips split against his teeth. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. Stop resisting, Frank repeated, though Jamal was doing nothing but trying to protect himself from injury. Passengers had backed away, forming a circle around the scene. Several had their phones out, recording the incident. Rebecca watched in horror from the jet bridge entrance, her hand covering her mouth. Tyler stood behind the counter, a flicker of satisfaction quickly replaced by professional concern as he realized how many witnesses were documenting the event. During the struggle, Jamal's Patek Philippe watch, a $75,000 timepiece he'd purchased to celebrate Horizon's first billion in assets, caught on Frank's uniform and snapped, falling to the floor where Frank's boot crushed the crystal face. He's bleeding, Dana observed, her voice tight with concern. Frank, ease up. He's not fighting. Frank ignored her, cinching plastic restraints around Jamal's wrists with punishing tightness. Airport policy for uncooperative individuals, he stated, mechanically. From the crowd, a woman stepped forward, Sarah Chen, a tech executive who had been waiting to board the same flight. This is completely unnecessary, she objected loudly. He wasn't doing anything wrong. I was watching the whole time. Ma'am, please step back and mind your own business, Frank ordered without looking up. I'm making it my business, Sarah insisted, her phone clearly recording. This is discrimination, plain and simple. Other passengers began to murmur in agreement, but none stepped forward to intervene directly. Fear and the bystander effect kept them rooted in place, recording but not acting. With brutal efficiency, Frank and Dana pulled Jamal to his feet. His once immaculate appearance was now marred by a torn jacket, a bloody lip, and the beginning of swelling around his right eye where his face had hit the floor. The restraints bit into his wrists, the plastic edges drawing blood where they were too tight. Have you ever witnessed injustice and felt powerless to stop it? Comment number 1, if you've ever seen discrimination happen in public. Comment number 2, if you would have spoken up like Sarah Chen did. This scenario plays out every day across America, sometimes with even more tragic results. Hit that like button if you believe accountability is essential, and subscribe to see how justice unfolds in this story. What do you think will happen when Jamal's true identity is revealed? Will there be consequences for those responsible? Stay tuned to find out how this shocking situation continues to escalate. As Frank and Dana began to march Jamal through the terminal, he maintained as much dignity as possible despite his condition. Travelers stopped to stare, some averting their eyes in discomfort, others openly recording the spectacle on their phones. Where are you taking me? Jamal asked, tasting blood as he spoke. Airport security office, Frank answered curtly. You can explain yourself there. With each step through the crowded terminal, Jamal's humiliation deepened. Here he was, a Harvard graduate, A CEO responsible for billions in assets, a man who had addressed the World Economic Forum just last month, being paraded through an airport like a criminal, bloodied and restrained. Behind them, the boarding for Flight 372 to San Francisco continued. Rebecca mechanically welcomed passengers aboard, though her hands shook slightly as she checked boarding passes. Tyler had resumed processing passengers as if nothing unusual had happened, though he avoided looking at the phone still recording the aftermath. The first-class passenger in seat 2A seems to have missed boarding, Rebecca noted quietly as the last group of passengers entered the jet bridge. Not our problem, Tyler replied, shuffling papers. He should have followed procedure. As Jamal was led away, he caught a glimpse of Rebecca watching him, her expression a complex mixture of guilt and fear. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away, unable to bear the silent accusation in his gaze. In that moment, as security dragged him toward a windowless room for questioning, Jamal made a promise to himself. This would not be buried or forgotten. The humiliation he felt now would be transformed into purpose, the same way he had transformed every obstacle in his life into opportunity. He may have been denied his seat today, but the reckoning that would follow would change far more than just one flight. The security office smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Jamal sat in an uncomfortable metal chair, his wrists still bound by the plastic restraints that bit into his skin. Officer Frank Reynolds stood against the wall, arms crossed, defensively, while Officer Dana Lopez hovered near the door, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. "Name and identification," Frank demanded, his tone suggesting this was a formality before more serious consequences. Jamal looked up, meeting Frank's gaze directly. The cut on his lip had stopped bleeding but throbbed painfully. "My name is Jamal Washington. I'm the CEO of Horizon Investments." His voice was calm, measured, the same tone he used in boardrooms when delivering consequential news. Frank scoffed. "Right. And I'm Warren Buffett. I need your actual identification, not fantasy titles." "My wallet is in my jacket's inner pocket," Jamal replied evenly. "Since I'm still restrained, you'll need to retrieve it yourself." With obvious skepticism, Frank roughly patted down Jamal's jacket, locating and removing a sleek leather wallet. He flipped it open, his expression unchanged as he examined the driver's license. "Jamal Washington," he read aloud, glancing between the ID and Jamal's face. "Still doesn't prove you're who you claim to be professionally." "Call this number," Jamal said, reciting his executive assistant's direct line from memory. "Gabriel Torres will confirm my identity, or you can Google me. Either way, I suggest you do it quickly before this situation deteriorates further for everyone involved." Something in Jamal's unwavering confidence finally penetrated Frank's armor of authority. He nodded to Dana. "Check it out." Dana stepped outside with her phone, while Frank maintained his position against the wall, his expression hardening as if preparing for disappointment. 3 minutes later, Dana returned, her face drained of color. "He's telling the truth," she said quietly, holding up her phone to show Frank a web page. "Jamal Washington, CEO of Horizon Investments. They manage over $30 billion in assets." She paused, then added reluctantly. "And according to recent financial news, Horizon acquired controlling interest in Global Aviation Group 3 months ago." "Which owns Mid-Air Airlines," Jamal added, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. "The airline whose employees just had me assaulted and dragged through a terminal in front of hundreds of witnesses." Frank's posture changed instantly, the realization of what had transpired, and its potential consequences, finally hitting home. "There must have been some misunderstanding," he began, moving forward to remove the restraints. "These situations can be confusing." "Stop talking," Jamal interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I want these restraints removed immediately. Then I'll need my phone to call my legal team. After that, I want to see the security footage of the entire incident, from the moment I approached the gate until now." As Frank hurriedly cut away the plastic restraints, Jamal winced at the pain in his wrists. Red indentations marked where the edges had cut into his skin, small beads of blood forming in the deepest areas. Dana offered him a tissue for his lip. "Sir, would you like medical attention? We have first aid." "What I need," Jamal interrupted, is accountability, starting with the footage. Within minutes, the atmosphere had transformed completely. The airport's director of operations, Anthony Gallagher, burst into the room, breathless and ashen-faced. "Mr. Washington, I cannot begin to express how deeply disturbed I am by this incident," he began, perspiration beading on his forehead. "We're pulling the security footage now, and I assure you, a full investigation." "I don't want assurances," Jamal cut in, now standing despite the pain radiating through his body. "I want action. Now." His phone, returned along with his damaged watch and wallet, buzzed continuously with incoming calls and messages. Gabriel had already been informed and was coordinating with Horizon's legal department. His executive team was being briefed. The machinery of corporate power, once activated, moved with impressive speed. Anthony led Jamal to a private office where security footage from multiple angles was being queued up on monitors. The images were damning. Tyler's visible disdain, the clear validity of Jamal's boarding pass, the fabricated issue, the unnecessary escalation, the excessive force. Most tellingly, the footage showed other first-class passengers being processed without question, while Jamal was singled out and humiliated. "This is unequivocal evidence of discrimination," Jamal stated, his voice tight with controlled anger, "and I intend to ensure it has consequences." While Jamal reviewed the footage, Midair's chief operations officer Lisa Monroe received an urgent call in her downtown office. The blood drained from her face as she listened. "Are you absolutely certain?" she asked, her fingers gripping the edge of her desk. "Jamal Washington, the CEO of Horizon?" After a pause, she closed her eyes briefly. "Yes, I'm aware they're our parent company now. I'll handle it immediately." Within the hour, Tyler Davidson and Rebecca Miller were called to an emergency meeting. With management, they sat in the small conference room, Tyler projecting indignant defensiveness, while Rebecca seemed to fold in on herself, already anticipating the fallout. "Would either of you care to explain what happened at Gate B23 approximately 45 minutes ago?" Lisa asked, her voice dangerously calm. Tyler straightened his uniform. "We had an uncooperative passenger who refused to follow boarding protocols. He became aggressive when asked to step aside, so security was called as per procedure." "This uncooperative passenger," Lisa said, sliding a photo across the table, "is Jamal Washington, CEO of Horizon Investments, which, as of 3 months ago, owns a controlling interest in our parent company. Essentially, he's our boss." Rebecca gasped softly while Tyler's expression froze in a mask of disbelief. "The entire incident was captured on security cameras," Lisa continued, "as well as on approximately 20 passenger phones, several of which have already uploaded their videos to social media. The hashtag #ThoughtYou'reFlyingWhileBlack is trending nationally, with our airline's name attached to it." Tyler began to protest. "How was I supposed to know who he—" "Stop!" Lisa interrupted sharply. "The issue isn't that you failed to recognize a VIP. The issue is that you discriminated against a passenger based on his race, fabricated a problem with his valid ticket, and escalated the situation unnecessarily, resulting in physical injury to that passenger. That would be unacceptable regardless of who he was." Back in the airport director's office, Jamal declined the offered medical attention, instead focusing on damage control. The incident had already cost him his crucial San Francisco meeting, potentially jeopardizing the billion-dollar merger. More important to him at the moment, however, was ensuring that what had happened to him wouldn't be dismissed or minimized. "I want copies of all the footage," he instructed his legal team over the phone. "And I want statements from witnesses, particularly the woman who spoke up, Sarah Chen." Sarah had indeed remained at the airport, delaying her own travel to provide a statement. "What happened was clearly discriminatory," she told the airport investigators. "He presented a valid boarding pass, was clearly a first-class passenger, and was treated like a criminal for simply existing in a space someone decided he didn't belong in." As Jamal coordinated with his team, videos of the incident spread across social media with stunning speed. The images were clear and damning. A well-dressed black man being violently thrown to the ground by airport security while attempting to board a flight with a valid ticket. Context and commentary followed, users quickly identifying both the airline and the airport, calling for boycotts and accountability. Gabrielle arrived at the airport in crisis mode, bringing a fresh suit and Jamal's emergency travel kit. The ITB board has been informed, she reported as Jamal cleaned up in a private bathroom. They're unanimously behind whatever action you choose to take. Legal is already preparing options. What about the San Francisco meeting? Jamal asked, wincing, as he cleaned the cut on his lip. Rescheduled for tomorrow morning. They were extremely understanding once they heard what happened. Gabrielle's expression softened slightly. Are you sure you don't want to see a doctor? That eye looks bad. Jamal examined his reflection in the mirror. The swelling around his eye had darkened, his split lip was prominent, and the indentations on his wrists were still angry red marks. These visible injuries would make his appearance at tomorrow's meeting all the more powerful. Sometimes, the most effective statements required no words at all. I'm fine, he assured her, straightening his fresh tie. But Mid-Air Airlines won't be by the time I'm finished. The airline had already offered a private jet to take him to San Francisco, which Jamal declined. I'll take a competitor's flight, he informed Lisa Monroe when she called to offer profuse apologies. And I suggest you prepare your team for significant changes. This isn't going away with an apology and a free flight. As Jamal finally boarded a flight to San Francisco, first class on a competing airline, the videos of his mistreatment continued to spread, viewed millions of times within hours. The public reaction was swift and unified. This was discrimination. Plain and simple, and it demanded accountability. What no one yet realized, except for Jamal himself, was that this incident would become the catalyst for an industry-wide reckoning, a transformation that would reach far beyond one airline or one airport. The humiliation he had endured would become fuel for systemic change, turning personal trauma into collective progress. The boardroom of West Coast Technologies fell silent as Jamal Washington entered. His face told a story no words could adequately convey. The swollen eye now darkened to a deep purple, the split lip still visibly raw, the marks on his wrists visible when his sleeves shifted. The 5 executives around the table exchanged uncomfortable glances, uncertain how to address the obvious. I apologize for rescheduling yesterday's meeting, Jamal said calmly, setting his briefcase on the polished table. There was an unfortunate incident at the airport. We saw, replied Catherine Zhao, the CEO of West Coast Technologies. It's all over the news and social media. Are you sure you're up for this meeting today? We would completely understand if you needed more time. I'm exactly where I need to be, Jamal assured her, his voice steady and professional despite his appearance. Some things can't wait. This merger and the opportunities it creates are among them. With remarkable composure, Jamal proceeded to lead the meeting as if nothing unusual had occurred. He presented Horizon's vision for the merger, outlined the financial projections, and addressed potential concerns with the same sharp intelligence and strategic thinking that had built his reputation. The only concession to his physical state was the occasional wince when his expressions pulled at his injured lip. The West Coast Technologies team watched with increasing admiration. Here was a man who, less than 24 hours after being publicly humiliated and physically assaulted, was conducting business with undiminished focus and clarity. By the meeting's end, the merger discussions had progressed even further than originally anticipated. Your ability to compartmentalize is remarkable, Catherine noted as they wrapped up. Most people would have taken a week off after what you experienced. Jamal's expression remained neutral. Taking time off wouldn't serve my goals. Creating positive change requires showing up, especially when it's difficult. He gathered his materials before adding, besides, I've had a lifetime of practice continuing forward despite obstacles. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, the Mid-Air Airlines executive team had assembled in their emergency conference room. The atmosphere was tense, faces grim as they reviewed the expanding crisis. Lisa Monroe stood at the head of the table, presenting the security footage to senior management. The videos have been viewed over 15 million times across platforms, she reported. Major news networks have picked up the story. Our call centers are overwhelmed with customers canceling reservations and asking about our discrimination policies. William Peterson, Mid-Air's CEO, sat at the opposite end of the table, his expression oscillating between anger and fear. At 61, he had navigated numerous corporate crises, but none with quite this level of public outrage or potential financial impact. "What's the stock doing?" he asked, his primary concern evident. "Down 7% since market open," the CFO replied grimly. "And still falling." Peterson pinched the bridge of his nose. "Have PR draft the standard apology statement. Isolated incident. Not reflective of our values, the usual language. Offer him lifetime first-class travel or something." Lisa exchanged glances with the company's general counsel, both recognizing the inadequacy of this approach. "William," she began carefully, "I don't think you understand the severity of this situation. This isn't just any passenger we're talking about. Jamal Washington's company owns 43% of our parent company. He essentially controls our board, and this incident was unambiguously discriminatory, captured from multiple angles, with dozens of witnesses." "Fine," Peterson conceded impatiently. "Make the statement stronger. Add something about anti-bias training for staff. But let's move quickly. Every hour this continues costs us revenue." In another part of the building, Tyler Davidson faced questioning from the airline's internal investigation team. Despite the overwhelming evidence, he remained defensive. "I was following protocol," he insisted. "His behavior seemed suspicious. How was I supposed to know he was some big-shot CEO?" "The issue," the investigator explained for the third time, "isn't that you failed to recognize his status. It's that you fabricated an issue with his valid boarding pass, which you didn't do for any other first-class passengers." "That's not true," Tyler argued. "I check everyone's passes the same way. We have the footage, Mr. Davidson. We can see that you barely glanced at other passengers' documents while spending an excessive amount of time scrutinizing Mr. Washington's. We can hear you claiming there was a problem when the system clearly showed none." In a separate room, Rebecca Miller sat with her hands twisted in her lap, tears occasionally slipping down her cheeks. Unlike Tyler, she made no attempt to justify what had happened. "I knew it was wrong," she admitted quietly. "I saw his boarding pass. There was nothing wrong with it. I've watched Tyler do this before, create problems that don't exist for certain passengers." She wiped her eyes. "I should have said something. I was afraid. I need this job, my husband's medical bills." "Your inaction still contributed to the situation," the investigator noted, though with less severity than had been directed at Tyler. "Why have you never reported these incidents before?" Rebecca's voice was barely audible. "The one time I filed a complaint about discriminatory treatment of a passenger, my hours were cut the following month. The message was clear. Officer Frank Reynolds had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, his record of excessive force complaints now under scrutiny. His partner, Dana Lopez, had provided a statement acknowledging that the force used had been unnecessary and disproportionate to any perceived threat. Mr. Washington was not aggressive or threatening at any point," her statement read. "He was attempting to identify himself when Officer Reynolds escalated the situation physically." Across social media, Sarah Chen's video had become the definitive documentation of the incident. Her clear narration and unwavering camera work captured every moment of the discrimination and subsequent assault. "This is what happens every day to people of color," she wrote in her post. "The only difference is that this time it happened to someone with the power to demand accountability." Major news networks had picked up the story, with analysts and commentators debating the broader implications. "This incident highlights the persistent reality of racial profiling in America," noted one civil rights attorney on a news panel. "The fact that even a man of Mr. Washington's stature can be treated this way demonstrates how deeply ingrained these biases are in our systems." As predicted, competing airlines began experiencing increased bookings as travelers actively avoided mid-air. Corporate clients, particularly those with diversity commitments, began issuing statements that they would suspend their business travel contracts with the airline pending resolution of the incident. Back in San Francisco, having successfully advanced the merger discussions, Jamal finally took a moment alone in his hotel suite to process what had happened. The adrenaline that had carried him through the day began to fade, leaving room for the physical pain and emotional weight of the experience. His phone rang, William Peterson's name appearing on the screen. Jamal let it go to voicemail already, knowing what the call would contain. Apologies without understanding, offers of compensation without accountability, promises of change without commitment. Instead, Jamal called his own executive team. "I want a full investigation," he instructed them. Not just of this incident, but of Mid-Air's entire history of passenger complaints regarding discrimination. "I want data, patterns, previous settlements, everything. This isn't about me. It's about changing a culture that allows this to happen to anyone." As he ended the call, Jamal moved to the window overlooking the San Francisco skyline. The city lights blurred slightly as fatigue and emotion threatened to overwhelm him. For all his success, for all his power and wealth, in that moment at the airport, none of it had mattered. He had been reduced to nothing more than the color of his skin, a reality that millions faced every day without the resources to demand justice. That would change, he decided. Starting tomorrow, he would use every tool at his disposal to ensure that what happened to him would lead to meaningful transformation. Not just at one airline, but throughout an industry that had too long allowed such discrimination to continue unchecked. 3 days after the incident, Jamal Washington sat in his Chicago office, the view of Lake Michigan partially obscured by stacks of documents on his desk. His physical injuries were beginning to heal. The swelling around his eye had diminished. Though the bruising remained visible and his split lip was on the mend, the psychological impact, however, continued to reverberate through his thoughts. His legal team had assembled a comprehensive dossier on Mid-Air Airlines' history of passenger treatment. Hannah Wright, Horizon's chief legal counsel, presented her findings with clinical precision. Over the past 5 years, Mid-Air has received 278 formal complaints alleging discriminatory treatment of passengers, she reported. 73% involved Black or brown travelers. Of these, only 32 were formally investigated, and just 7 resulted in any documented disciplinary action against employees. Jamal studied the patterns emerging from the data. And Tyler Davidson? Hannah flipped to another section of her report. 11 complaints specifically naming him in the past 3 years alone. None resulted in any recorded disciplinary action. She passed over a folder. "We've also identified 27 similar incidents where passengers were denied boarding or removed from flights despite having valid tickets. The correlation with race is statistically significant." "What about internal communications?" Jamal asked, thinking ahead to potential legal strategies. "That's where it gets interesting," Hannah replied, her expression grim but satisfied, the look of an attorney who had found exactly what she was searching for. "Our IT team gained access to Mid-Air's internal email systems through our parent company authorization. We've discovered numerous emails where management explicitly instructed customer service staff to ignore certain categories of complaints, including those related to alleged discrimination." She placed several printed emails in front of him, key passages highlighted. One from a regional manager read, "These claims of discrimination are becoming excessive, and investigating each one drains resources. Unless there's potential legal action or media coverage, file and forget. Do you believe discrimination like this is isolated or systematic? Comment number 1 if you think these are just bad apples, or comment number 2 if you believe this represents deeper institutional problems. Have you or someone you know ever experienced discrimination while traveling? Like this video if you think companies should be held accountable for creating cultures that enable bias. Subscribe to see how Jamal uses his position of power to create real change. The question now is, how deep does this problem go, and what will it take to transform an entire industry? In the financial markets, Mid-Air's stock had dropped 15% in just 2 days as the story continued to gain traction. Institutional investors were raising concerns about leadership and risk management, and analysts had downgraded the stock from hold to sell. Meanwhile, independent journalist Darius Taylor had begun his own investigation into Mid-Air's practices. With 15 years of experience covering corporate misconduct, Darius had developed sources throughout the airline industry. His preliminary reporting had uncovered a pattern that extended beyond Mid-Air. The airline has a documented history of profiling passengers, he wrote in his initial article. Sources describe an unofficial but understood practice of subjecting certain travelers to additional scrutiny, particularly in premium cabins or airport lounges. Multiple former employees confirmed that staff received no meaningful consequences for complaints about discriminatory treatment. Darius had obtained internal training materials that revealed a troubling emphasis on passenger profiling for security purposes, with vague criteria that could easily serve as cover for racial bias. His reporting also highlighted that Mid-Air had settled several discrimination lawsuits quietly, with non-disclosure agreements preventing victims from speaking publicly. On the fourth day after the incident, William Peterson finally managed to reach Jamal by phone. "Mr. Washington, first let me express my deepest personal apologies for your experience," Peterson began, his voice practiced in crisis management. "What happened is completely unacceptable and doesn't reflect our company values. We're prepared to offer a generous settlement to resolve this matter quickly and privately." Jamal let the offer hang in the air for a moment before responding. "Mr. Peterson, I'm not interested in a settlement. No amount of money addresses the systematic issues at play here. We've already announced new anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff," Peterson continued, desperation edging into his tone. "The employees involved have been suspended pending investigation. We're taking this very seriously." "Suspended, not terminated," Jamal noted. "And training doesn't address a culture that has normalized discrimination. The data shows this isn't an isolated incident, but a pattern your management has actively chosen to ignore." Peterson's tone chilled. "Mr. Washington, with all due respect, every airline deals with these issues. Singling out Mid-Air isn't fair to our thousands of employees who provide excellent service every day." "I'm not singling out Mid-Air," Jamal replied calmly. "I'm holding it accountable because I now have the power to do so. Others haven't been so fortunate." After ending the call, Jamal received a surprising email from Rebecca Miller, offering to provide testimony about the airline's internal practices. "I've witnessed systematic discrimination for years and remained silent out of fear," she wrote. "What happened to you has forced me to examine my own complicity. I'm willing to share everything I know about how these incidents are handled, or, rather, not handled, within the company." Rebecca's testimony proved invaluable, providing first-hand accounts of how management discouraged reporting, how certain employees were known for their discriminatory behavior but protected by supervisors, and how concerns raised by staff were routinely dismissed or minimized. While Jamal built his case, Tyler Davidson appeared on a conservative news program, positioning himself as the victim of cancel culture and reverse discrimination. "I was just doing my job according to company protocol," he insisted to the sympathetic host. "Now my career is being destroyed because of political correctness gone mad. I treated Mr. Washington exactly as I would treat any passenger whose behavior raised concerns." The host nodded solemnly. "So you're being punished essentially for being thorough in your duties?" "Exactly," Tyler agreed. "If he'd just complied and stepped aside as requested, none of this would have happened." The interview backfired spectacularly when viewers immediately identified the racial implications of demanding compliance from a black passenger who had done nothing wrong. Social media erupted with further calls for accountability, with many pointing out that Tyler's own words revealed his biases. Officer Frank Reynolds faced his own reckoning as his history of excessive force incidents became public. Journalist Darius Taylor uncovered that Frank had been transferred to airport security after similar complaints at his previous position with city law enforcement. The pattern suggested not accountability, but merely shuffling problem officers to different locations. Officer Dana Lopez, wrestling with her conscience, decided to become a whistleblower about security practices at the airport. "There's an unofficial but understood directive to give additional scrutiny to certain types of passengers," she revealed in a sworn statement. "The criteria are never explicitly stated as racial, but the implementation is undeniably biased in practice." Sarah Chen, whose video had now been viewed over 30 million times, started an online petition demanding systemic changes in how airlines train staff and handle discrimination complaints. "What happened to Jamal Washington happens to countless travelers who don't have his resources or platform," she wrote. "The only difference is that they suffer in silence or are disbelieved when they speak up. As public pressure mounted, news emerged that Jamal's company owned 43% of Mid-Air's parent company. This revelation transformed the narrative from one of individual discrimination to one of corporate accountability and shareholder power. Business publications began speculating about potential leadership changes and restructuring at the airline. This represents a unique situation where the victim of discrimination has the actual corporate authority to demand meaningful change, noted one business analyst. Most passengers have no recourse beyond complaints that can be ignored or settlements that include silence. Mr. Washington has the power to transform the company from within. Jamal's legal team compiled their findings into a comprehensive report, documenting the extent of discriminatory practices at Mid-Air. The evidence was damning: statistical patterns of discrimination, internal communications discouraging proper investigation, testimony from current and former employees, and a history of ignoring or burying complaints. With this ammunition in hand, Jamal prepared for the next phase of his response. This would not end with token gestures or performative apologies. The reckoning he envisioned would transform not just one airline, but set a new standard for the entire industry. "Schedule a special shareholders meeting," he instructed Gabriel. "It's time to use our ownership position to create real change." As the meeting was being arranged, Jamal met with civil rights attorneys to discuss a potential class action lawsuit on behalf of all passengers who had experienced similar discrimination. The lawsuit would serve multiple purposes: providing justice for past victims, creating financial incentives for reform, and establishing legal precedent for holding companies accountable. 7 days after being denied his first-class seat, Jamal Washington had transformed from a victim of discrimination to the architect of systemic change. The humiliation he had experienced would become the catalyst for a new era of accountability, not just for Mid-Air Airlines, but for an industry that had too long allowed such practices to continue unchecked. The Mid-Air Airlines boardroom had never felt so tense. Executive team members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, eyes darting nervously toward the door. Outside, assistants whispered anxiously as they refreshed news sites and stock tickers. The company's shares had fallen 22% in the week since the incident, wiping billions from its market capitalization. William Peterson paced at the head of the table, checking his watch repeatedly. "He's making us wait deliberately," he muttered to Lisa Monroe. "Power play." "Can you blame him?" Lisa replied quietly. "After what happened, I'd say he's being remarkably restrained." The door finally opened, and Jamal Washington entered, flanked by his legal team and chief financial officer. Though his physical injuries were healing, they remained visible, a deliberate choice to forgo concealer that might have hidden the remnants of his bruising. The message was clear: he would not cover up what had happened, literally or figuratively. "Thank you all for convening this special shareholders meeting on short notice," Jamal began, his voice measured and authoritative. He remained standing, a subtle but effective dominance display. "As you're aware, Horizon Investments now controls 43% of Global Aviation Group, making us the majority shareholder of Mid-Air Airlines." William Peterson attempted to seize control of the narrative. "Mr. Washington, before we proceed, I want to reiterate our deepest apologies for the unfortunate incident last week. We've already taken steps to address, suspended 2 employees and announced yet another ineffective training program," Jamal interrupted coolly. "I'm aware of your steps, Mr. Peterson. They're wholly inadequate given the scope of the problem." Peterson's face flushed. "With all due respect, one isolated incident." "It wasn't isolated," Jamal cut in again, nodding to his legal counsel, who distributed thick binders to each board member. "What you're receiving is a comprehensive report documenting 278 formal complaints of discriminatory treatment over the past 5 years. 73% involved passengers of color. Only 7 resulted in any disciplinary action." The board members exchanged alarmed glances as they flipped through the damning evidence. "Additionally," Jamal continued, "we've uncovered internal communications explicitly instructing staff to ignore discrimination complaints unless they posed legal or public relations risks." He nodded to his team, who projected an email onto the screen behind him. The message from a senior operations manager read, "Unless these people have lawyers or media attention, file and forget. We don't have time for every person who feels disrespected." The boardroom fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about systematic failure at every level of the organization. Jamal pressed on relentlessly. "We've also identified a pattern of complaints against specific employees who were never disciplined. Tyler Davidson, the gate agent who denied my boarding, had 11 prior complaints." Another slide appeared, showing Tyler's personnel record with the complaints highlighted. His supervisor noted these complaints, but took no action. "These records should be confidential," Peterson objected weakly. "As majority shareholders, we have every right to review employee records when investigating misconduct," Jamal's legal counsel responded smoothly. "Particularly when there's evidence of corporate negligence." The next hour proceeded like a meticulously planned legal prosecution, with Jamal and his team presenting evidence of systematic discrimination throughout the airline. Flight attendant Rebecca Miller had provided devastating testimony about the culture of bias she'd witnessed and her fear of retaliation for reporting incidents. Ms. Miller observed Mr. Davidson's discriminatory behavior on multiple occasions, Jamal explained. When she previously reported similar incidents, her hours were reduced the following month. The message was clear: stay silent or face consequences. Rebecca herself had been invited to the meeting to share her experiences directly. She spoke softly, but with growing confidence as she detailed specific incidents she'd witnessed over her 20 years with the airline. There were unwritten rules, she explained. Extra scrutiny for certain passengers in premium cabins. Assumptions about who belonged in first class. Comments and jokes among staff that went unchallenged by management. When incidents occurred, they were dismissed as misunderstandings rather than addressed as discrimination. Tyler Davidson's personnel file revealed a supervisor's note that was particularly damning. Customer service style can be abrupt with certain passengers. May need coaching on appropriate interactions but meets metrics otherwise. Certain passengers, Jamal repeated with controlled anger. We all know what that means, don't we? Security officer Frank Reynolds had been fired from the airport. Security company, his history of excessive force incidents finally catching up with him. His partner, Dana Lopez, had provided testimony about security profiling practices that disproportionately targeted passengers of color. As the evidence mounted, the board members' expressions shifted from defensive to concerned to openly alarmed. The legal and financial exposure was potentially catastrophic if this information became public, which, given Jamal's position, it certainly would. William Peterson made a desperate attempt to contain the damage. "These are serious concerns that we must address," he conceded, his voice strained. "But they reflect the actions of a few bad employees, not our company values or policies." Jamal fixed him with an unwavering stare. When a pattern of discrimination exists for years, is repeatedly reported, and consistently ignored by management, it absolutely reflects company values. Your actions, or rather, inactions, speak far louder than any mission statement or diversity pledge on your website. He turned to address the entire board. As majority shareholders, we are calling for immediate changes. First, the termination of all employees directly involved in discriminatory incidents, including supervisors who failed to address reported problems. Second, the establishment of an independent oversight committee to handle discrimination complaints. Third, a complete overhaul of training and accountability systems. Peterson's face had grown increasingly pale. These measures would be extremely costly and disruptive, not nearly as costly as the class action lawsuit we're prepared to file if these changes aren't implemented, Jamal's legal counsel interjected smoothly, or the continued loss of market share as customers choose airlines that don't humiliate their passengers. The final blow came when Jamal announced, "Given the systematic failures of leadership that allowed this culture to flourish, we are also calling for the resignation of the current CEO and executive team, effective immediately." The boardroom erupted in protests and objections, but Jamal remained unmoved. "As majority shareholders, we will call for a formal vote if necessary. I suggest you consider your positions carefully." As the meeting continued, news broke that Sarah Chen's petition demanding accountability had reached 1 million signatures. Competing airlines had begun announcing their own anti-bias training programs and transparent complaint procedures, sensing an opportunity to distinguish themselves in the marketplace. By the end of the 4-hour meeting, the board had capitulated to most of Jamal's demands. William Peterson would step down as CEO, with a transition plan to be implemented over 30 days. Tyler Davidson had already been terminated, and a full review of all employees with discrimination complaints was underway. The Independent Oversight Committee would be established within 2 weeks. "This is just the beginning," Jamal informed them as the meeting concluded. "I'll be personally overseeing the transformation of this airline into an industry leader in equitable treatment and accountability. What happened to me will never happen to another passenger, not because I'm a VIP, but because it shouldn't happen to anyone, regardless of their status." As he left the boardroom, Jamal felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction at the accountability being established, determination to create lasting change, and a lingering sadness that such measures were necessary at all. The personal humiliation he had experienced was being transformed into systemic improvement, but the fact remained that discrimination was so deeply embedded that it took someone with his level of power to force meaningful change. "We've made progress today," he told his team as they departed, "but the real work is just beginning." 2 weeks after the incident that had now become a case study in corporate accountability, Jamal Washington stood in Midair's operations center, observing the airline's daily functions with new eyes. As interim CEO, a role he had reluctantly accepted until a suitable permanent replacement could be found, he had immersed himself in understanding every aspect of the company's operations. "Our first priority," he explained to the assembled department heads, "is to redesign the boarding procedures to eliminate opportunities for subjective bias." He gestured to the screens displaying gate operations. "I want clear, objective criteria for all passenger interactions. No more discretion that can serve as cover for discrimination." The executives nodded, their initial resistance having given way to pragmatic acceptance. The company's stock had begun to stabilize as the market responded positively to the leadership changes and commitment to reform. "We've brought in Dr. Kimberly Watson to oversee our training redesign," Jamal continued, introducing a distinguished black woman with gray-streaked dreadlocks and an air of unmistakable authority. "Dr. Watson is the leading expert on eliminating bias in customer service environments." Dr. Watson stepped forward. "Thank you, Mr. Washington. What we're undertaking isn't just another sensitivity training program. Those have repeatedly proven ineffective. We're rebuilding your entire approach to customer interactions, creating systems that produce equitable treatment regardless of individual biases." The transformation extended far beyond training. Jamal had implemented immediate changes to every aspect of the passenger experience, focusing particularly on points where discretion had previously allowed bias to flourish. "All upgrade and boarding decisions will now be fully automated and transparent," explained the new head of customer experience. "Staff cannot override these systems without supervisor approval and documentation. Every exception must be logged with specific justification." Perhaps most surprisingly, Rebecca Miller had been offered a position on the newly formed diversity and inclusion team. Her insider knowledge of problematic practices made her invaluable in identifying areas for improvement, and her willingness to speak up, albeit belatedly, demonstrated the potential for change within the existing workforce. "I spent 20 years witnessing discrimination and doing nothing," Rebecca admitted during a staff training session. "My silence made me complicit. It took seeing someone being physically assaulted for me to finally find my voice. Don't make the same mistake I did." Tyler Davidson faced consequences beyond losing his job. His recorded statements defending his actions and subsequent media appearances had provided clear evidence of discriminatory intent. The airline's new leadership had cooperated fully with authorities, resulting in charges being filed for filing false reports that had led to Jamal's assault. Frank Reynolds faced more serious legal troubles. The assault charges were compounded by his history of excessive force incidents, resulting in criminal charges that could end his career permanently. His case had prompted a broader investigation, into security practices at multiple airports. Dana Lopez, who had chosen to become a whistleblower about security profiling practices, received recognition for her courage. Though she had initially failed to prevent Jamal's mistreatment, her subsequent actions to expose systematic issues had contributed significantly to the reforms now being implemented. Sometimes doing the right thing late is better than never doing it at all, Jamal told her when they met during a security protocol review. Your testimony helped ensure these changes will protect future passengers. Sarah Chen, whose video had been instrumental in documenting the incident, had been invited to join a newly formed passenger advocacy committee. This independent body would review complaints and provide oversight of the airline's response to allegations of discrimination. What happened to you resonated with so many people because it's a story that repeats daily across the country, she told Jamal during their first committee meeting. The only difference was that you had the power to demand accountability. Power I intend to use responsibly, Jamal assured her. This committee will ensure that every passenger has a voice, regardless of their status or resources. The transformation wasn't limited to policy changes. Jamal had insisted on a transparent complaint system with external oversight, ensuring that patterns of problematic behavior couldn't be buried or ignored. Every complaint would be tracked, investigated, and resolved with clear documentation and accountability. Throughout the airline industry, executives watched the changes at Midair with intense interest. Some viewed the reforms as an overcorrection to a single incident. Others recognized the opportunity to address long-standing issues before facing similar crises. We're seeing a ripple effect across the industry, noted an aviation analyst in a business journal. Airlines are proactively reviewing their own complaint histories and implementing similar reforms. None want to be the next Midair. Meanwhile, Jamal had successfully completed the billion-dollar deal in San Francisco, creating thousands of new jobs, many in underserved communities. The merger had proceeded despite the disruption caused by the airport incident, a testament to Jamal's ability to maintain focus on long-term goals even amid personal challenges. This deal isn't just about profit, he explained during the signing ceremony. It's about creating opportunities in communities that have been overlooked and underestimated, something I understand personally. As media interest in the story began to wane, Jamal delivered a powerful speech to all Midair employees about accountability and transformation. Standing before hundreds of staff members, the visible remnants of his injuries still evident, he spoke not as a victim, but as a leader. What happened to me was traumatic, he acknowledged. But trauma can be transformed into progress when we have the courage to face uncomfortable truths. This company failed. Not just me, but countless passengers who experienced discrimination without the resources to demand change. Our task now is not to bury that failure, but to learn from it, to rebuild in a way that ensures it never happens again. The speech was met with a standing ovation from many employees who had long recognized the problems but felt powerless to address them. The cultural shift was palpable, from fear of speaking up to encouragement of honest feedback, from burying problems to confronting them openly. As the 2-week mark of his interim leadership approached, Jamal reviewed the progress reports with cautious optimism. Passenger complaints had decreased, employee satisfaction scores were rising, and the initial resistance to change had largely dissipated. We're moving in the right direction, he told his executive team at Horizon Investments. But real transformation takes time and consistent effort. We can't declare victory and walk away. The incident that had begun with humiliation was evolving into something more powerful, a catalyst for change that extended beyond one airline or one airport. It had sparked conversations about race, power, accountability, and justice that reached far beyond the original incident. For Jamal personally, the experience had reinforced something he had always known, but sometimes allowed himself to forget: that no amount of success, wealth, or status could fully shield him from the reality of being Black in America. The difference was that now he had leveraged that painful truth into creating change that would benefit countless others who lacked his resources and platform. As he reviewed the designs for the rebranded airline, soon to be unveiled as Horizon Air, Jamal felt a sense of purpose that transcended corporate success. This transformation represented something more meaningful, the conversion of personal trauma into collective progress, a testament to the possibility of change even in systems that had long resisted it. 6 months had passed since the incident that had transformed both Jamal Washington's life and an entire airline. The bruises had long since healed, but the impact of that day continued to ripple outward in ways few could have predicted. Jamal settled into his first-class seat on Flight 372, the same route number, the same destination as that fateful day. The airline, however, was barely recognizable as the same company. Rebranded as Horizon Air, with a new management team, new policies, and a transformed culture, it had emerged from crisis stronger than before. The boarding process had proceeded with flawless efficiency. The automated system had processed passengers in clear sequence with no room for subjective discretion that could mask bias. The gate agents had been professional and courteous to everyone, regardless of appearance or status. Most importantly, there was an observable consistency in how all passengers were treated, the hallmark of a system designed for equity. Jamal had boarded like any other passenger, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater. The new staff didn't immediately recognize him. They had been hired after his interim leadership had ended, and the permanent CEO, a highly respected airline industry veteran with a strong record on inclusivity, had taken over. This anonymity was intentional. Jamal wanted to experience the airline as an ordinary customer would, to verify that the changes weren't just performative or reserved for VIPs. As he settled in, arranging his laptop and water bottle, a flight attendant approached with the pre-flight beverage service. She stopped abruptly, recognition dawning in her eyes. "Mr. Washington?" she asked, her professional composure momentarily slipping. "I didn't realize you would be on this flight." Jamal smiled. "Just doing a quality check. So far, everything's excellent." The flight attendant, her name tag read Jennifer, seemed briefly flustered before recovering her professional demeanor. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot coming from you." She hesitated, then added, "I joined Horizon specifically because of the changes you implemented. My previous airline, well, let's just say the culture was very different." "I'm glad to hear that," Jamal replied sincerely. "That's exactly the outcome we hoped for, attracting people who share our values." As Jennifer moved on to other passengers, Rebecca Miller emerged from the front galley. Now serving as the airline's head of customer experience, she had retained her flight credentials and occasionally worked flights to maintain her connection to frontline operations. Her face brightened when she spotted Jamal. "I thought that might be you on the manifest," she said, taking the empty seat beside him before boarding completed. "First time back on this route?" "First time as a passenger," Jamal confirmed. "I wanted to see how things are running from the customer perspective." Rebecca nodded, understanding the significance of his presence on this particular flight. "We've come a long way in 6 months." Indeed they had. Internal statistics showed discrimination complaints down 78% across the airline. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. The stock had not only recovered, but surpassed its previous value as investors recognized the company's transformation into an industry leader in customer service and corporate responsibility. "I read the quarterly report," Jamal said. "The numbers are impressive, but I'm more interested in what you're seeing on the ground. Has the culture really changed, or are people just being more careful?" Rebecca considered the question thoughtfully. "It's both. Some people are just following the new procedures because they have to. But there's a growing number who genuinely understand why these changes matter." She lowered her voice slightly. "That day, watching what happened to you, it changed me, made me confront my own complicity in a system I knew was wrong. I'm not the only one who had that realization." Their conversation was interrupted as a passenger 3 rows ahead became visibly agitated, raising his voice about an issue with his seat. Under the old system, such a disruption might have escalated quickly, potentially involving security if the passenger was perceived as difficult, a label disproportionately applied to passengers of color. Instead, Jamal watched as the situation was handled with remarkable skill. The lead flight attendant calmly addressed the passenger's concern, explained the available options, and found an acceptable solution without escalation or embarrassment. The entire interaction lasted less than 2 minutes and ended with the passenger thanking the staff for their help. "That's new training in action," Rebecca explained quietly. "De-escalation, problem-solving, and most importantly, consistent application of policies, regardless of who the passenger is." The flight proceeded smoothly, and Jamal found himself reflecting on the journey, not just the physical one to San Francisco, but the transformation that had occurred since his humiliation. 6 months earlier, the billion-dollar merger he'd nearly missed that day had been successfully completed, creating over 2,000 jobs, many in underserved communities like the one where he'd grown up. Horizon Investments had used its influence to ensure that opportunities were distributed equitably, with targeted recruitment in neighborhoods with historically high unemployment. The airline had introduced scholarship programs for minorities interested in aviation careers, from pilots to mechanics to management, creating the pipeline for future leadership, as the new CEO had described it during the announcement. Jamal had declined the Aviation Industry Leadership Award he'd been offered, suggesting instead that it go to Rebecca and the other employees who had spoken up about systematic problems. "Real change happens from within," he'd explained. "I just created the conditions for it to happen." As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Jamal gazed out the window at the city below. He thought back to his childhood in South Chicago, where commercial planes had passed overhead regularly, but had seemed as inaccessible as spaceships to a boy from his neighborhood. Now he not only flew constantly, but had helped transform an airline into a model of equitable treatment. The cabin crew made their final announcements referring to the company by its new name, Horizon Air. The rebranding had been about more than just a logo change. It symbolized the complete transformation of the company culture and practices. Horizon represented possibility, opportunity, and the promise of a better future, values that resonated deeply with Jamal's personal journey. After landing, as passengers prepared to disembark, a young black boy peered curiously into the first-class cabin. His eyes widened when he spotted Jamal, clearly recognizing him from news coverage. "Are you really Jamal Washington?" the boy asked, his voice filled with awe. "I am," Jamal confirmed with a warm smile. "What's your name?" "Devin. I did my school project on you," the boy announced proudly, "about how you changed the whole airline because they were mean to you." Jamal considered how to respond to this simplified but essentially accurate summary. "It wasn't just about them being mean to me," he explained gently. "It was about making sure everyone gets treated fairly, no matter what they look like." Devin nodded solemnly. "My mom says that's why it's important to have people who look like us in charge of things." "Your mom sounds very wise," Jamal replied, unexpected emotion tightening his throat. This brief interaction embodied exactly why the painful experience had been worth the fight, not just for justice in his own case, but for the impact on children like Devin, who would grow up seeing examples of accountability and change. As the plane emptied, Rebecca approached one final time. "Heading to another meeting?" she asked. "Not today," Jamal replied. "Today I'm taking some personal time. Sometimes you need to step back and appreciate how far you've come." Jamal Washington's story teaches us that true power lies not in wealth or position, but in how we use these advantages to create systemic change. When discrimination occurs, the most privileged response is often silence or private settlement, maintaining the status quo while securing personal compensation. Jamal chose a harder path, using his experience to transform an entire industry. The story highlights how discrimination persists, regardless of achievement or status. A Harvard education, billions in assets and executive titles couldn't protect Jamal from being judged by his skin color. This reality exposes the fallacy that success alone shields Black Americans from racism. We also see the critical difference between performative solutions, training programs, apologies, and structural change, accountability systems, leadership overhaul, policy reform. Real transformation requires addressing root causes, not symptoms. Perhaps most importantly, The story demonstrates how individual courage ripples outward. Rebecca's eventual decision to speak up, Sarah's immediate intervention, Dana's whistleblowing, each action contributed to meaningful change. Though not everyone has Jamal's resources, everyone has some capacity to challenge injustice when witnessed. Change is possible, even in entrenched systems, when courage meets opportunity and accountability replaces complacency. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had the power to change the system? Jamal's story shows that change starts with individuals refusing to accept the unacceptable. Share your experiences in the comments. Have you spoken up against injustice? Or wished you had? What stopped you? If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help it reach others who need this message of accountability and transformation. Subscribe to hear more powerful stories of justice served and systems changed. Share this video with someone who might be losing faith that institutions can be held accountable. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to be silenced. Thank you for joining me on this journey from humiliation to triumph. Remember, in a world where discrimination still exists, your voice and actions matter more than you know. Together, we can transform moments of injustice into catalysts for lasting change. As Jamal walked through the terminal where he had once been dragged, bloodied, and humiliated, he felt a profound sense of closure. The trauma had been real, the injustice undeniable. But the response, the transformation of pain into progress, had created a legacy far more significant than the incident itself. The airline industry would never be quite the same. Competitors had implemented similar reforms, recognizing that equitable treatment wasn't just morally right, but good business. Passenger advocacy groups had gained strength, using Jamal's case as a blueprint for demanding accountability. Most importantly, countless travelers who would never know his name would experience more dignity and respect because of his refusal to accept discrimination as inevitable. Stepping out into the San Francisco sunshine, Jamal Washington carried the knowledge that his most meaningful achievement wasn't measured in dollars or deals, but in the systems he had helped transform and the precedent he had established. One man had been denied a seat, but the ripple effects had opened doors for countless others. That, he reflected as he headed toward the city, was the true measure of success. Not what you gain for yourself, but what you change for others.